Farms like this one, in Sabershausen in the Hunsrück, belong to a house type common across the region, the Einhaus, where living quarters, barn, and stables sit under a single roof, one continuous structure built for a family and its animals together. Between the human rooms and the animal stalls sits the threshing floor, the tenna, and in a farmhouse built this way, it is the true center of the building, not an afterthought. It serves as entryway, storage space, and workspace all at once. Its surface is a hard-wearing clay screed, and in summer, farmers stored their daily bread there, since anywhere else in the house the air ran too close and the food turned musty too fast. Hay and winter fodder from the hills got the same treatment. Toward the back usually stood the threshing machine, because before anything else, the tenna was the traditional place where grain was threshed. Smaller holdings, a craftsman's place, a day laborer's, rarely had this kind of floor at all. Their barns sat apart from the house, and the threshing floor was never the heart of the operation the way it was here. In front of the wagon, the tools for the day's work already stand ready, everything needed to lay a new clay floor. Two neighbors have just arrived to lend a hand, and their help matters because this isn't a job for one household alone. In the old days, when grain was threshed by hand with flails, the screed had to be renewed the moment wagon ruts began cutting depressions into its surface. The harvest itself depended on a threshing floor in good condition. As a rule, that meant redoing the whole floor roughly once every 3 years. By then, the old clay has gone hard enough that it has to be broken loose with a pickaxe, coming away in large, stubborn plates. The men swing hard, again and again, working the pick along the brick edges of the old threshold, loosening chunk after chunk before shoveling the broken clay aside and digging out the corners by hand. For all that hardness, though, the material keeps a certain elasticity, and that combination, hard yet still a little forgiving, is exactly what a threshing floor needs to survive years of grain carts rolling over it. Nobody tears out the whole floor. Only the worn front section, the part actually chewed up by wagon wheels, roughly 2/3 of the total floor, gets dug out down to a depth of 15 to 20 centimeters, stopped short at a brick-set threshold that marks the boundary of the old threshing area. To haul the broken clay away, the farm wagon is refitted for the job, headboard and side planks added on, turned for the afternoon into a simple muck cart. With the cart already loaded with the old, worn-out clay, the trip heads out into the fields toward a patch of common land called Lengau at the edge of the parish boundary, overgrown at its edges with scrub. This is where the fresh clay comes from, clay that was dug the previous autumn with the same kind of neighborly help being given today. Left in a heap through the winter, the frost did its own slow work on it, breaking the clay down into loose, crumbly lumps, and the dry spring air finished the job, drawing the last moisture out until the material reached exactly the right condition for what comes next. Like the wagons that bring in the harvest, the heavily loaded clay cart has to be backed into the barn. The building simply isn't deep enough to drive in head first and still have room to turn. To manage the reverse, one of the draft animals is unhitched from its usual place and hitched instead to the rear end of the long shaft so it can push the cart backward into the narrow space. Inside, the layout of the threshing floor is easy to read, the excavated section at the front, and behind it, the older, undisturbed clay still holding its screed. Getting the cart into position took its own careful choreography. Horses hitched, guided backwards step by step, the cart pole adjusted until everything lined up square with the barn door. Unloading starts with the 2 headboards, lifted off first, then the sideboards, pried up and out with a lever bar and hung aside to clear the way. Now the clay only needs a push to come down off the cart, the men pulling and shoving at the heavy mass until it drops in a heap on the floor below, working the last of it loose with their hands. A full barn floor, at this size, usually takes at least 3 separate cartloads of clay to cover. But here, 1 load is enough, the raw, fine-grained material for the new screeds still to come. With the cart empty, the sideboards go back on, secured for the walk back, and the horse is led away, its part of the day's work already finished. Once the clay is dumped in a heap in front of the barn door, it still has several separate stages of preparation ahead of it before it becomes a floor. Men with shovels move in first, spreading the pile out and breaking up the larger lumps as they go, working the mass flatter with each pass. The village children are already waiting nearby for this exact moment. For them, laying a new threshing floor is something close to an event, a custom that used to repeat itself every year, somewhere between hay harvest and grain harvest. By old tradition, the children have a real job to do here, though their moment hasn't arrived quite yet. First, the clay has to be spread out completely free of any foreign material, so it can be leveled properly. Loose clumps and stones get picked out carefully by hand, and men work barefoot to feel out the high and low spots underfoot, raking and shaping the clay's edge as they go. The men build up the loose clay about 1 to 2 centimeters higher than the old floor's level, because the finished, compacted screed will settle back down to exactly the earlier height once it's done. And because rainwater that finds its way in needs somewhere to go, the whole surface gets a slight slope toward the threshold. The next stage of working the clay calls for water, a lot of it, fetched by hand. A man works the pump handle, filling bucket after bucket, then carries a watering can toward the barn. Loose as it is right now, the clay has to be moistened before it can be firmed into anything solid. Watering cans go around the whole surface, the water poured on carefully, a little at a time. Getting exactly the right amount matters more than it might sound. By the old threshing floor maker's rule of thumb, the clay has taken up enough water the moment it starts sticking to the soles of your shoes. What comes next needs real kneading, working the moistened clay through and through until it holds together as one uniform mass. And for that, nothing does the job as effectively as a set of hooves. The farm woman leads the cows in from their stalls and out onto the wet clay, and it's characteristic of farms built this way that this particular job falls to her, not to the men. The cows step out uncertainly at first, hooves sinking into the soft surface, and she turns them, walks them forward, turns them again. Loose manure that clings to a hoof can't be allowed to get worked into the clay, so a man follows behind with a shovel, clearing it away as it falls. Round and round the cattle go, driven in circles that widen and tighten across the surface of the floor, walked back and forth for as long as it takes, until every part of the clay has been trodden into one consistent, uniform mass. The hoof prints themselves close up a record of just how thoroughly the ground has been worked. Even while they're kept standing in place a while longer, chewing hay, their own weight and stillness helps settle the clay a little further. The more thoroughly this treading is done now, the more durable the finished floor will prove to be later. There is something almost ceremonial in it, watching draft animals do methodically, hoof by hoof, what would otherwise take hours of hand labor to accomplish. A farm's whole working life in miniature, put to use readying its own floor. Only now, finally, does it become the village children's turn. What draws them isn't only the candy already being handed around, it's the rare chance for genuinely unrestrained play right there on the working threshing floor, sanctioned by the adults rather than scolded. The children are directed in the old traditional way by an experienced Tennenklatsche, a threshing floor master who knows exactly how this is supposed to go. Because what matters most isn't the fun itself, but that the children's bare, energetic feet stamp the tough clay as thoroughly as any adult could manage by hand. First comes a kind of running, tag-like game, weaving in no straight lines at all, but in winding paths that touch every corner of the floor, making sure no patch of clay goes untouched by small feet. The children's faces caught close up mid-run, breathless and grinning. Before long, the game changes for variety's sake. The children are lined up in a long row and set jumping, forward, then backward, across the width of the floor, landing each time with their feet held together so that the full weight of the jump strikes the clay in one concentrated blow rather than scattering it across two separate footfalls. Between rounds, enthusiasm gets a boost from more candy, tossed out in handfuls that send the children scrambling and searching through the clay to find them. In earlier years, marbles were handed out just as often for the same purpose and thrown the same way. Then, finally, comes the moment the whole afternoon has really been building toward. One of the men climbs a ladder up into the loft, ties off a length of rope and chain to the beam above the threshing floor, and rigs together a makeshift swing right there over the worked clay. The whole barn briefly quiet as everyone watches him work the knot, because swinging at the very end is the real main attraction of the entire custom. It's the reason all of these games together, the running and jumping and swinging combined, go by one collective name in this region: Schleppengehen, going out to swing. The children take turns, one after another, some jumping off mid-arc, boys jostling and pushing each other for the next go, girls climbing on for their turn in between, the swing chains creaking with every push. Turn after turn, the children stay in constant motion, kept happily occupied and working the whole time, for an entire afternoon inside the barn. This wasn't a one-off amusement invented for the film. Threshing floor play like this used to belong among the fixed seasonal games of Hunsrück village life, a genuine calendar event. Each year, from mid-July through early August, the community of children between roughly 7 and 14 years old gathered at 3 different farms in turn, moving from one household's threshing floor day to the next, going along together daily as the custom made its rounds through the neighborhood. The same faces showing up at farm after farm across those few high summer weeks. The whole sequence ends with one final flourish, a scattered throw of the children's own shoes across the floor, sending the entire group scrambling once more, barefoot, over every last patch of the new clay, hunting down their own shoes among the others. One final pass of stamping feet before a washtub of water is brought out to clean, clay-caked feet, and the games are done, and the real finishing work can begin. So that no parent has cause to complain, the day's organizers make sure nobody heads home afterward with clay caked up their legs. A small courtesy that closes out the children's part of the day, the tub of wash water and dry shoes waiting by the door. Only now do the men turn to their actual work, and it will need plenty more water before it's done. What the trodden, kneaded clay needs now is to be beaten firm and, finally, smoothed to a proper finish. Any stray candy wrapper left lying in the clay gets carefully picked up first. Even something that small would mar the surface of the finished screed if left to be pressed in. For the beating itself, the men reach for tools once found on every farm in the region. The Tennenklatschen, heavy wooden paddles built specifically for this one job. The handle curves downward in a particular way that lets a man bring the whole flat, striking face of the heavy beach board down onto the clay with real force, again and again, rather than glancing off at an angle. The paddles get dipped in water often through this stage, which keeps the clay from sticking to the wood with every strike. The men work in a steady line, beating in rhythm, then stepping backward together as a strip of floor comes clean and even behind them, dipping the paddle again, striking again. Each impact carries its own small vibration through the surface, and that jarring motion does real work of its own, helping settle the material even as the flat force of the blow presses it down. Slowly, blow by blow, the countless heel prints the children's feet left behind get leveled back out, smoothed into a single, even surface. And with every strike, the paddles compact the clay a little further, driving out air pockets and tightening the whole mass. Wherever a low spot or hollow shows up in the surface, the men simply add more moist clay directly into it, working it in with the same beating motion, dipping the paddle again and striking again, until the new material bonds seamlessly with what's already there underneath. The work is loud, rhythmic, repetitive, the same flat crack of wood on wet clay over and over. Close-up shots catching the paddle head as it lands, water flying with each impact, the men's arms rising and falling in a pattern that barely varies from strike to strike. The beating always starts at the rear of the threshing floor and works forward from there, section by section, in cross strips running the width of the room. Each strip gets beaten and smoothed completely before the men move on to the next, which means nobody ever has to step back onto a section that's already finished. The work simply advances forward, one clean strip at a time, until the whole floor is done. For the actual drawing off and smoothing, the men use flat wooden boards called Klemmblätter. The same tool, worked from the same tradition, once used to spread clay plaster onto timber frame walls elsewhere on the farm. Made from poplar or fir, they too need to be dipped in water again and again through the work, kept wet so they glide across the surface instead of dragging or tearing it. In steady back-and-forth rhythm, beat, then smooth, the men gradually work their way from the rear of the floor to the front. It takes experienced hands to do this well, and traditionally, as here, it was typically 3 neighboring farmers who banded together for the job, rotating from farm to farm on a 3-year cycle, each one returning the favor when a neighbor's own threshing floor needed the same care. The finished screed runs out level right at the door's threshold, exactly as it should. In some other regions, farmers finished the job by dousing the surface with ox blood for durability. Not done here, but known across the wider tradition. What remains now is patience. The fresh clay needs a full 14 days to harden, and through that whole stretch, the barn door stays shut, protecting the floor from sun and from cracking. Prepared this way, once more, the threshing floor stands ready to meet the harvest.